Chapter 12. Nico found himself at Camp Half-Blood. He stood outside the front door of the big house, hand raised, cheeks stinging from the cold. As his knuckles rapped the door, he realized which moment he was reliving. He knew what waited for him on the other side of that door. Another memory he very much preferred not to visit. But, like in all his nightmares, he had no choice. He pushed his way inside. His gaze jumped anxiously from Chiron to Annabeth, from Selena Beauregard to Charles Beckendorf, from Stoll Brothers to Percy Jackson. All of them were gathered in the living room, staring glumly at the carpet or the fire crackling in the hearth. Nico didn't want to ask what was wrong. He already knew the answer. Still, the words spilled from his mouth. "Hey, where's my sister?" The air seemed to leave the room, just as it had on the actual day. The blood drained from Percy's face. He stood, putting out his palms, as if Nico were a feral cat he was trying to approach. "Hey, Nico, listen to me, okay?" The memory was so raw, so agonizing. But Nico managed to regain control, wrestling himself from the grip of the dream logic. "No!" he screamed. "I am not reliving this nightmare again." Chiron swiveled in his wheelchair toward him. "You have to, young demigod," he said. But his voice was wrong. It now belonged to Epialis. "You can't escape this." Nico sneered. He marched across the room, pushing aside Percy Jackson, who loomed over Chiron. "You've been behind all these horrible dreams I've been having for months, then. Why do you keep telling me to listen? What does this have to do with Bob?" Chiron's face twisted in confusion, and Epialis spoke through him again. "For months? But you can't manipulate me." Nico unsheathed his sword. "This isn't real, and you can't hold me here forever." Chiron/Epialis scratched their chin, apparently unfazed by the Stygian iron blade in their face. "Wait, can we go back to you claiming I've been sending you dreams for months? I certainly wish I had been. That would have been so fun. But no, Mother only required that I intercept you and Will Solace once you passed through the door of Orpheus. Also, who is Bob?" Nico's sword hand wavered. Around him, the images of his fellow demigods flickered like faulty light bulbs. "You know exactly who I'm talking about," he said, though he couldn't muster much conviction. "Who is Mother?" Epialis smiled through Chiron's face. "Oh, some questions you don't want to answer, Nico D'Angelo." Then the floor split, and Nico fell into the void. Will's eyes fluttered open. It was dark, which didn't tell him much. All the underworld was dark, but as his vision adjusted to the shadows, he realized he was lying on a thin stretch of brickwork at the edge of a sewer trench. "Jump the cow?" said a voice to his right. "That was your plan." Will turned his head, and there she was, Meg McCaffrey, her dark hair unkempt and her face sweaty. Her rhinestone-studded cat-eye glasses sparkled in the gloom. "Meg?" he said. "How did you get here?" She scowled at him. "Same way as you, son boy. Your boyfriend helped us." Will's heart dropped when he looked to where Meg was pointing. Nico was curled up asleep in the tight space they were sharing. Will called over to him. "Nico!" He cupped his hands around his boyfriend's face. "Nico, are you okay?" "He'll be fine, assuming you can heal him." Will looked up at a bedraggled teen boy with acne and ill-fitting clothes. Lester Papadopoulos, a.k.a. the ex-god formerly known as Apollo, a.k.a. Dad. But how is he back? Apollo had been returned to godhood at the end of the summer, and Will had expected that it would be years before he saw his father again, if ever. Will's head was full of a terrible fog, something thick and soupy that made it difficult to sort between the present and his memories. He had lived through this moment before, hadn't he? So why was he living it again? He vaguely remembered being in another place, a dark, smoky figure towering over him. "Help him," a third voice broke through Will's thoughts. Rachel Elizabeth Darrett was glaring at him expectantly. "I thought you were a healer." "And I thought you were one of my children," said Lester, crossing his arms. "My children are supposed to be the best doctors." "What use are you?" Meg asked, her voice sharper than before, "if you can't even fix your own boyfriend?" No, Will thought, this isn't right. There was a prophecy. His mind grasped for it. Was he supposed to leave something behind? But his companions were all staring at him, waiting for him to do his job. Will dug in his pockets furiously. Where was his supply of Kit Kats? He pulled his pockets out. They were empty. When he looked down at Nico again, he seemed even paler than usual. "Nico, wake up," Will pleaded. "You have to be okay." "Does he?" jeered Rachel, her red hair falling over her face. "Come on, Will Solace. Heal him." "Heal him," Lester ordered, and it was the command of a god, not of a 17-year-old. The melody escaped Will's lips. He sang in Greek, caressing Nico's forehead, hoping beyond hope that the color would return to his boyfriend's face. "You're supposed to be good at this," Meg grumbled. Will's hands began to glow, dully at first, then brighter, until his body illuminated the sewer culvert. He pressed his fingers into Nico's cheeks. tears running down his face. But Nico wasn't responding. In fact, the color in Nico's whole body was disappearing. So he looked like he belonged in an old television show. I can do this, Will said, sobbing. I can save you. Nico's eyes opened, but they were milky white. No, he said, smiling coldly. You can't. He grabbed Will's wrist. Will yelped in protest. His light began to drain away, flowing into Nico's body. As Nico's color returned, he sat up and pushed Will to the ground while the others looked on approvingly. Finally, you're good for something, Lester said. You make an excellent spare battery. Will was unable to breathe, his life draining away, his colors vanishing until his fingers were gray as ash. He tried to cry out, to plead with Nico, but he made no sound. Then Nico released his grip, and Will tumbled into darkness. As Nico fell, he could sense something waiting for him below in the darkness, much like he could sense the dead lurking beneath the soil. This time, instead of waiting to land in another dream, he lashed out, grabbing the presents with both hands, and was rewarded with a startled, piercing shriek. The dream world fractured. Nico opened his eyes and found his fingers clamped around Epialus' throat. Nico was free. Epialus thrashed, two of their appendages flinging Nico across the ground. Nico rolled, avoiding another set of appendages that were trying to grab him. His hand found the scabbard of his sword, and he yanked it free, pointing the glowing blade at Epialus. The demon roared, Why are you making this so difficult? Who doesn't want to sleep all the time? Your mistake was thinking you could keep me down in my own home, Nico said with a sneer. Then he jammed his sword into the dirt. All around him the dead rose, flesh and rotted clothes clinging to the skeletons, dim light glowing in the eye sockets of the cracked skulls, rusted swords clutched in bony fingers. But there were more than just humans there. This was the underworld, after all. A pack of skeletal wolves snarled at Epialus. A dragon-like creature the size of a car flicked its vertebral tail, snapping its long jaws. I can summon as many of them as I need to, said Nico. This won't go the way you want. Epialus laughed, a high, giddy sound. Nico, you're not thinking correctly. The demon waved their right hand, and in an instant, every skeleton crumpled onto the ground, fast asleep. I'm the demon of nightmares, silly, said Epialus, and the dead can dream just like everyone else. They raised both of their hands, and the ground cracked beneath Nico's feet. He scrambled backward as more of the dead clawed their way to the surface. Humans, beasts, monsters. But these hadn't been summoned by Nico, and they weren't skeletons. These beings flickered in and out of view, drifting over the ground like they were both there and not there. How could you even think to frighten or harm me? Epialus continued. I bring darkness to the minds of others. I can summon anything, dead, living, real, imaginary, to torment you. There was a terrible, terrible roar behind Nico, and when he spun around, he saw an impossible creature. A manticore, with the body of a lion, the tail of a scorpion, and the face of a man. But this wasn't just any manticore. This one had the short, gray hair, the mismatched blue and brown eyes, and the hawkish face of Dr. Thorne, Nico's old vice principal from Westover Hall. Suddenly, Nico felt like a helpless little kid again. He backed away, unable to master his fear. Epialus laughed, their mouth full of black teeth. You can't defeat me, Nico D'Angelo. I am darkness. Yours, Will's, everyone's. Their every appendage rose into the air, then whipped toward Nico and lifted his sword. Will rolled onto his stomach, his hand now free, and the stench of the underworld hit his nose. He nearly gagged, but there, just ahead of him, he saw the demon Epialus, surrounded by a host of terrible creatures. He saw the manticore and knew exactly who it was from the stories Nico had told him. He heard Epialus' warning. You can't defeat me. I am darkness. Yours, Will's, everyone's. Epialus' horrible appendages rose, and Will understood. Of course, Nico had not abandoned him at the river Styx, or drained the light out of him when Will tried to heal him. They were just nightmares. Epialus playing on his worst fears, just as they were now doing to Nico. And Will wasn't going to lie there and let anyone hurt his boyfriend. Will didn't think. He rose to his feet and shouted in defiance, and when he did so, his skin glowed brighter than ever before. Light erupted from his chest, slicing through the dark appendages that whipped at Nico. He watched in shock as they fell to the ground and flopped there. Epialus looked just as shocked. As the manticore poofed out of existence, the demon of nightmares stared at their severed appendages, which wriggled like long, lanky eels out of water. Ow, they said, staring at Will eyes wide. Did you just... Will? Nico pushed himself up on one elbow. What was that? No, seriously, what was that? Said Epialus, folding their remaining appendages protectively behind them. Mother never told me about whatever that was. It's light, said Will, breathing heavily, a line of sweat trickling down his left temple. You said you were darkness. Well, I'm the opposite. Epialus inched back, whimpering pitifully. Suddenly, they seemed more like a scolded child than a demon. Mother is going to be so disappointed in me. She already thinks I'm not as powerful as I could be. Now you're probably going to defeat me, aren't you? Well, I kind of have to, Will said. We have a quest to complete, you know. The demon stomped a foot. You demigods always have to ruin things, and no one appreciates what I offer the world. For what it's worth, Nico said, struggling to his feet. Your nightmares, they're really good. Totally, said Will. I believe they were real until about 2 minutes ago. At that, Epialus perked up, their appendages fluttering. The ones Will had severed were already starting to regrow. Really? You think so? Nico nodded. Definitely high-grade material. Well, shucks, said Epialus. No one has ever told me that. And you're sure you weren't the one sending me nightmares before we entered the underworld? Very sure, said Epialus. I would claim it in a heartbeat if it had been me. Will frowned at his boyfriend, wondering what conversation he'd missed, but a different question rose to the surface of his thoughts. Who is your mother? He asked the demon. Epialus merely smiled. You'll find out soon enough. Just go ahead and blast me with your light. Get it over with. Will hesitated. It somehow seemed wrong to blast someone on request, but Epialus was a demon. They'd regenerate down in Tartarus anyway, starting the cycle all over again. They were a monster. Will was a demigod. That's how it worked, right? Epialus must have sensed his reluctance. They raised their appendages and roared at Will, and just like that, it happened again. Will's fear guided him. Light burst from his chest, smacking Epialus in the face, and with a piercing scream, the demon dissolved. Nico stared at him in disbelief. Will? Will drew a shaky breath. His eyes were swimming with exhaustion. He'd worried that he'd finally done something that would make Nico realize they were simply, irreconcilably too different. Yes? Nico didn't seem to be able to talk at first. Then, you're a legitimate demigod Care Bear. Will's top lip trembled. He fell to his knees. Then he bent over in loud, raucous laughter until tears poured from his eyes. You're so weird, Nico crawled over, pulled Will to him, and silenced his laughter with a tender kiss. Please keep being my own personal Care Bear, though. Always, said Will. And then he promptly passed out.